And I also need to make sure that the sound is working. All right, excavation, just basic summary for you all. All right, so excavation is one, not the only technique we have in archaeology to collect, analyze, and do as best that we can for explaining archaeological materials. However, most things that are ancient have been covered over by other things that are more modern over time, whether that's just sediment that comes in from rain or wind blowing sand in, or things that new populations come in, tear stuff down, build in the same spot, excavation. And I know you knew that. Buried materials, more abundant and better preserved than those on the surface. It is really common, and you are looking at a couple case studies, like things coming from wet sites or underwater archaeology, that if those materials that have been preserved under the surface and haven't been with sunlight, wind, drying out, bacteria, insects, and so forth, when we find them and bring them up, they begin to decompose really rapidly, and we have to apply some preservation techniques to those. So buried materials usually much more abundant and better preserved than the surface. It's for much of what we are interested in learning about human societies is really essential in order to obtain more information than just what might be from historic records, memory, or what's preserved on the surface. And as we've looked at in several class meetings before, we are aiming to answer very specific questions with our excavations. Once we've stated what those questions are and done survey in a variety of techniques like we talked about last time, then it's time to start the excavation. We're getting better and better at underwater archaeology. So you have 2 quick videos in Canvas. They're not really long, but take a look and make sure you just see what the purpose of those were. What are they doing and what were they looking for? It isn't always ships. Little tip going forward. And then wet site applications, sites that may have been on the edge of the ocean or the margins of a lake, pond, river, but now, because of changes in climate or water distribution, are now really like firm or low density water over the whole site. And your wet site excavation sample for this unit is Ozette in the state of Washington. In terms of who works on these sites, if it is in modern archaeology, there is always an excavation director. The director is named in our applications for funding, granting, and permits. It's not really our purpose in this class to really talk about the permitting process in detail, but there's always a lot. Really, no matter where in the world we are doing that excavating. So there's a director, and the director needs to be able to plan, raise funding, supervise the crew, and be in charge of making sure that everyone is recording and turning in, maintaining their day-to-day notes. And we take notes multiple times during the day. It is not something where you're not supposed to use your memory in science. So field crew then is essential. So here's a photo, I think we already saw it, perhaps of a couple of students, excavators, from a project that I was working on here. And part of this particular project is the students came from the US, but were excavating in rural coastal Guatemala. So part of what the excavation director also had to do was be sure that there was housing, groceries, food prep, running water of some sort or another, because this was not a site that had any plumbing per se, right? And transportation to get people in and out. So there's a lot. Excavation director is a lot to do. And sometimes as we do this, we will, but it is always a surprise when we find really incredible artifacts or features. Now this couple, they're not a couple, this couple of students here have found an amazing feature. Remember, a feature is when you have an assembly of materials in the same spot, and they are leaving them in the same spot. They're not lifting the top off until they find out how far down in the ground this went. And as you can see, there's a lot of things, and the top one was turned upside down before they put the dirt back over the top of it. This was buried initially. Okay, probably you could have ascertained those because an archaeological director is very similar to being director of almost any other type of project that we do. Field crew, though, is our most important part of the project. The excavation is really labor intensive, but I will say I have worked with students who have virtually no standard vision. I've worked with students where lifting heavy things isn't something they can do, but they can do other parts of the project. Worked with students that had other types of personal concerns. But everybody needs to be able to get up every morning and get out and do their part of the process, although that part can be a little bit flexible. So the crew actually does the actual digging, and then we will have not only the director, but we'll have other oversight individuals that make sure that whether we're doing multiple test pits or different parts of the site or different crews, that if they have questions, if they need something, right, that we're running and getting them what they need, that we're answering the questions or making sure they can have a productive day. Variety of individuals. So I've also worked with people in their 80s down to young college students, people that are locals, and in crews where there's people with different language abilities and in some cases aren't able to talk to each other at all. So, and it can go on for months, but there are projects where field work goes for months at a time during a season, and then they stop for rainy season, or perhaps when it gets too hot to do it and be healthy, and then come back year after year after year for long periods of time. All right, so this one, the highlighted area here, a little bit more for your notes. The others were just a summary, similar to what you have in your reading. Okay, when we select sites to excavate, some of our most pressing candidates will be those that are threatened by modern construction or modern development. And there is an entire profession of archaeologists, which we'll learn about in another unit in more detail, where this is primarily what their work is. And actually, I have a number of students that started out in archaeology class at Southwestern College and then went on to university, more training, more field training, and now work in this type of archaeology locally here in San Diego County. So when we are trying to preserve and save as fast as we can something that's going to be destroyed by modern building. Second group, usually those where we have a good expectation from all those techniques we talked about last time, that the site is going to be well preserved or have a larger amount of materials available to learn from. And that what we're expecting that we might learn from them is going to give us a better understanding of an entire region, or perhaps a time frame for that region. So they are looking for those, right? Money well spent. And then, as we looked at before, choice of a site, results of some form of a survey. Field walking, some of the aerial surveys, that we saw? In order to locate something that's not as apparent. What's the opposite of this? If you're thinking, well, of course, that's how we're going to choose the site. Remember, some of the sites are obviously where they are, and everybody locally knows it because they're not too deep and the materials are coming up or eroding out. There's been a landslide, water washing over, wind changes and sand is blown away, and now we can see things right on the surface. So that's survey generally for many of them. All right. Probably on these you all don't need the full sentence, just the key phrases, and that will jog your memory. Recall to some of our former classmates, creating maps and grids. It's essential. After our field walking to make sure that this is an area that we're going to spend time on, then creating the maps and then laying out a grid over the top of it. Essential. Cannot do scientific archaeology unless we have those maps and grids, right? Because the grid is going to be how we do the two-dimensional measurement of where exactly something was located. And then the third dimension comes when we excavate and we say how deep it is. So we need a datum point, just like any mapping, that's your 0 point, and then everything refers back to that datum or 0 point. So we marked that grid out across the surface. We looked at that together last Thursday, but you also have it in your textbook. And then that datum or reference points are established. And what is the term for the equipment that we use to do this today? Total station. Usually you will hear a project talking about their total station, and that is their mapping equipment. If you're thinking you'll go into this either as something that's interesting, maybe not long-term your job, or something that you will eventually take a class in, it's part of your anthro major, or you would like to do this kind of work, then those field technique classes, this is one of the first key things that's very important, knowing how to use or understand the use of a total station. Back in the day, it was different and very challenging to do. Today, slow, a little bit easier to get accurate measurements. We looked at this before, so I'm just gonna jog your memory here for a moment. Probably don't need to take notes on this one. Just take a look. Test pits, we did that in the first unit. I just gave a quick first look, and then your textbook in chapter 3 talks about this again. Sometimes, like we did in one of our class meets in this unit, Unit 2, sometimes we are using a random technique, right, for those sampling strategy notes you took about a week and a half ago. And sometimes then we've got something that's a little bit more systematic. So just be sure that you have the titles in a quick half sentence leaning into exam time for our 4 most basic sampling strategies. All right, so we've got the grid, the map, the grid. We've decided on our test pitting or sampling strategy, and then we get to the actual excavation. Our 2 basic formats can be used together at the same project, or we might just use one type, depends on the research question. So again, Wheeler box grid or Wheeler Canyon or Balkan grid. Here's another image of that. Those of you that have already worked on at least one attempt on the quiz, you have noticed that there are going to be images in the mix. So some of the questions are just asking you, what are you looking at? It's part of the way we assess that students or learners or our employees or our team members are able to use terms to something that actually physically exists. So do remember from before, but you all did well on this in the first exam, those excavations that emphasize the vertical dimension go straight down. They're cutting into those deposits, deeper deposits, and they're looking at stratification, which was what you worked on some of the key vocabulary concepts for your class activity for this unit. And then the second are those that are emphasizing opening something up wide, the horizontal dimension. So they're going to open up larger areas. Those are of one layer in order to reveal the spatial relationships between the artifacts and features in that area. Horizontal, also known as clearing, vertical, test pitting. And this one that we look at, they are, because what they're looking at is so large that they're maintaining a way to do measurements in each one and separate up their crews. But this one is, the box grid is trying to look at things at one moment in time. They're clearing this out. If you see a photograph where the project has opened up and is showing you the entire ground floor of an ancient house, even if it's not fancy, and you can see the shape of the house, where the posts or poles were, maybe where the doorway was, you are looking at this one, a horizontal or clearing excavation. You're like, oh yeah, I learned that like a month ago, because we're in week 6 now, you all. Hooray. Or if it was fast track, we would be in week 3. All right. In Canvas, for your examples there's an embedded video, and we also saw another sample from the excavations a little bit previously in class, but for right now, it's only any questions you might see are only going to refer to what's clearly right in this unit right now. The excavation example is from Jamestown, which is historically really important. So when there's a key term on the handout, some of you might have just logged in before or after I posted that again. It is in Canvas, but at the end of class, if you don't see that in your chat inventory, just let me know and I'll put it up again. So what might the questions be when you see an example of a video in Canvas that I'm asking you to use as an example or a case study? So in your notes, when you view it, write down name of the site, where is it, how old it is, if they mention it, right? Are we looking at something that's 250 years old? Are we looking at something that's 1,000 years old, right? More or less, when was the site occupied? And why did I put it up for you? Why is that an example of something? So again, just because it's on the top of my brain this morning, who knows why? Ozette, where is it? It's in the state of Washington, and it belongs to the Makah Nation. So that's a tribe that still owns the property and did most of the excavation. When were people living out of Ozette? And why are we learning about Ozette right now? And the answer to that one is because it's an example of wet site archaeology, that it's endangered from getting washed out into the ocean. It is really, really wet there. So everything that they're recovering needs to be really carefully handled, because if you leave it out in the air, it's going to start rotting or decomposing really quickly. So in Jamestown, the same thing. Where is it? When was it in use? And why are we talking about it in class right now? Is it just mainly examples of how to use mapping? Is that what is that the 5 minutes that I put in there for you? Right, again, I do understand that lots of students have assessment anxiety. I did too when I was a student. And what I can tell you about moving towards reducing that, right, assessment or end zone anxiety is that being very careful with prep and also having a good idea of what it is that you need to prepare. So that's why I do this with you, so that you can say, oh, I have these. If they ask me about this, I covered this. I know where it is. I know why it's in the class at this time. All right. And in this one, when you watch that, they're going to say something about features versus using screening. So let's go back. Okay. So that's the main purpose of that particular one. And we'll look at a quick example. Okay, so this is Cooper's Ferry archaeology site. So this quick one is going to look again about tools. We saw a little bit where they were showing you the shovels that they shaped and sharpened, and the trowels that they shaped and sharpened here. But let's take a look at a few more.
Well, we're here at the Cooper's Ferry site, and we want to talk about how we excavate. So this is the way that we find out information about people of the past, is to come in and remove the sediments that are here in order to find anything that's left behind from those people that lived here a long time ago. So in my hand, I have the tool that we're going to use the most in our excavation, and that's a trowel. This is just a simple trowel that you can use for laying bricks, but we also use it to dig. And it's really nice because it's not a very big instrument, and we can sharpen the edge on one side to give us this ability to dig dirt very easily. We also use a brush. And the brush is also used to just simply sweep up the dirt after we've excavated it. We put it into a dustpan, and that goes into a bucket. All that dirt will go to the screen, and they're going to look for anything that I've missed when I'm excavating. One of the things that we need to pay attention to as we're digging is not to use this thing inappropriately. We don't want to use the tip in a way that digs down into places we can't see. So we don't want to stab into the ground. We want to use this nice edge to just simply pull the dirt, scraping it away very carefully, very easily, to find any artifacts or bones or shells or other things associated with people of the past, in order to find them in the ground. By finding them in place, we actually can learn more about what people were doing here at the site than if we just had the objects. So if we came in here with a bulldozer and pushed all this away and screened all of the dirt and just found all the thousands of tools and flakes of rock and bone and shell, well, that would just tell us the things that we already know. The people of the past made stone tools, they ate deer, let's say, and they also ate shellfish. But that's not the most important thing. We want to find these things together, next to each other, so we understand that they did this kind of activity over here or that kind of activity over there. By reconstructing all the things in space, we can learn a lot more about what people were doing here in the past.
All right. So again, being able to look at features and associations. All righty. Okay. Stratigraphy, you worked a little bit on the key conversations on stratigraphy. And again, we see that those layers as they go down, as we have our excavation pits that are going up and down rather than horizontally. So those layers, to just review a bit with you, reveal how the site was formed or how materials accumulated. Do we see layers where it's just coming in because there's flooding or nobody's there for a long time, so wind is blowing stuff in? Usually the bottom layer is the oldest, but not always. You did look again at some of these concepts for your class visual activity. When we evaluate the stratigraphy, right, reading the layers, we have to look and be able to identify after, when we're all done, layers that are natural or things that are happening that are natural. And again, simple one would be occasionally there's a really horrible, intense rainy season. It brings a lot of mud and washes in a lot of gravel or sand or small or medium-sized rocks. And we'll see that that lays over the top of everything. And then when people come back, they just start walking and moving on the top of that. So we can see those intermissions of layers that have human artifacts, features in them, or were created by people bringing in things versus though where nature deposits the materials. And so when we assess that, as we do the best that we can while we're working, and then later on, we take our samples and support or refute what we thought that we saw in the field. And here's a good example of a series of test pits here. We see one team here. Let's do my little spotlight. There's one team here on this side, and then a second team over here. We'll get a little, I'm going to go backwards. Here, so we've got one group here and another group here. Let me just look at it for a moment real quickly. In this case, these are in a line because at this site, the sampling strategy identified that there's this hill that's kind of a long ridge. And so on purpose, we placed several test pits. This is a project I participated in, several test pits, to see if this was all one thing that they built on top of and maybe what it was used for, or whether something else was going on. So what we see here on this one, this person is standing on the edge of the test pit, but what we see here are the people that are screening the material that was made from using the trowels, or we can also use those flat-bladed shovels as well, depends on the site. We bring up anything that's not obviously an artifact, big enough to see, put them here, and then use in a fine scale screen. In this one back here, we've got two screens. Here's one on the side, one here, and you can see these people, all you can see is their head right here. This one, so they've already dug further down on this particular one. And again, we've got the screening. As we screen, we have to move the screens over time because that backfill, that loose dirt that we didn't find anything in, starts to build up. When we're finished with an excavation, we put all that loose dirt back in the pit and tamp it down so that things go more or less back the way that they started. Now, when we do, again, a vertical pit, doesn't matter the project. This is the same project, just a slightly different time of day. Again, here's one that's getting deeper and deeper. We've got our screening. We've got some of the local workers here taking a break, which is fine. And some of our tools that are over here. You can see that we've got flat-bladed shovel. We use something in this part of the world called a koa, which is, again, a very narrow flat-bladed shovel, trowels, and constantly with, right, our lines here so we can always measure how far down we are and whether things are sloping. So here is an example of a test pit where we found a feature here, this big jar, which hasn't been opened up. So at the time that the photo was taken, we know where the floor was that it was put on. Then a bunch more fill came in. Then we see all this broken pile of stuff. Turned out this is not related to this. This was a hole they dug to put trash in. All these broken ceramics, big ones. And then over here in the side for another activity, but still sort of in the sidewall, we see an entirely unbroken small bowl that was not removed at the time we took that. So again, we leave them in until we're able to map them. Take photos, draw them, and map them. Is there any there, or what's the sequence? So then when this comes into the lab, we know that this is substantially earlier than the period of time where somebody else dug a hole to get rid of the trash, and that this is even younger than this one. Okay, with horizontal ones, and we did look this in a little bit previously, so again, a little bit of review here. Horizontal or area excavations will expose those larger, wider areas. We usually, if we find a structure or something of interest as we're going down, then we may decide to stop right there and move it out so that we can see how big it is in total, not just that there's a corner of the building there, for instance. So we're trying to, with an area or horizontal or clearing excavation, as mentioned in your text, we're trying to recover information on the arrangement of materials in the site and structures, just like that quick video where he said, we want to not just find out what's there, but what was being used in this spot versus another, or how closely were they doing this activity to doing another activity. We might be able to really, and prehistoric just means before we have any historic records, documents, even if they're ancient documents, and things like that. So just before we have any other way of knowing when something happened, we might be able to take a look at the whole floor where somebody's house was, or where manufacturing was, or where something else was going on. Later on in the class, I'll show you some images of a recent Egyptian excavation that's finished up, where they have found the oldest known brewery in Egypt. It's awesome. So as we remove each layer, then information about each one is going to be analyzed and recorded once we take it to the lab. Okay, so a couple quick pictures, one that we saw already earlier, and another one that's somewhat similar. And both of these, you wouldn't see something at this unit asking you where these are from, since I haven't labeled them, just what is it that you're looking at. So again, to wrap this up, a horizontal or clearing excavation, when we saw this one, and you can see here, right, that we have these features. They found them when they did a very careful, shallow, careful with the trowels and the brushes excavation. They started to see that there was a real difference in color between this color and this color. And as they opened that up wide and followed it around, we saw that they were oblong, and that there was 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9 of these that they just found so far. And this is the one where they were able to document the presence of the cemetery zone adjacent to slave quarters in the US southern states. It was not the project's purpose to remove those people from where their families had buried them. What's this over here that looks like all jaggedy? They saw the edges of this, and it turned out that a tree had grown right into this one. So they did go ahead and remove the tree from the surface so that it didn't damage this any further. As the roots got bigger, it tears things apart, and leave it be for the documentation. So again, this one was to locate and identify how this area was used. And see this soil over here, right? This is the screened back soil. This has already been looked through and set aside because it doesn't seem to have much information for us. Now, if we look at this other one here, again, this would be a little bit different. In this one, they located that the walls were actually made of stacked flat stone, different part of the world. So as they began to excavate in a clearing excavation, they were able to find the edges of this riser inside the building, whether this is where they stored things, slept, kept some other equipment or so forth. That would be part of what they're going to analyze from the materials that are around it. There's also here something right next to it that shows a different color sample. Some stone right here that looks darker, filled with charcoal. This one the same. So these are probably little fire pits, like heater zones. Could be for cooking, could just be to warm up the inside of the structure. Again, as they remove those materials and test them in the lab, they'll get a better idea of probably how they were used. So clearing excavations. Okay,